Councilmember Shane McFarland has our prayer and pledge this evening. Welcome, Mr. McFarland.
Thank you. If you'll bow your head. Father, we thank you for this chance to be here tonight, for the opportunity that we have to represent the citizens of Murfreesboro. Lord, we pray for our service providers, for the firemen and women and the police officers that just take care of us every day. We pray that you protect them, that you watch over them. Thank you for those that are protecting our freedom overseas, and also for those that are protecting our freedom here in the States. Thank you for what you're doing for us and the way you love us. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council, March 29, 2012. We have a number of visitors with us, distinguished visitors, and among those distinguished visitors we have with us tonight, Senator Bill Ketron is here. We recognize you, Senator Ketron, in your service to our city and to our county and to our state, and we're certainly pleased and glad you're here tonight. Thank you for being with us. I want to make one brief announcement, if I could, that April the 4th at the Oakland baseball facility there will be a short ceremony to rename that facility in honor of Coach Jack Jolly at the Oakland baseball facility at Oakland High School out on DeJarnett Lane. And that'll be at 5:30 on April the 4th. We certainly salute Coach Jolly and all he's meant to baseball in our community, and certainly this is a very welcomed recognition for him. And as a good city resident, we recognize him. We're pleased that he's going to be honored in this way. So that's 5:30 p.m., April the 4th, at the Oakland baseball facility at Oakland High School. Also, I'd like to present on behalf of our City Council a proclamation to our Parks and Recreation Department, who will be coordinating a collaborative community-wide effort to encourage and promote a wide range of innovative health and active lifestyle opportunities for all our residents. And Vice Mayor and Mr. McFarland both serve on our Parks and Recreation Commission, and a few of us have gained a little weight since we have come back to Murfreesboro to live after school, and I think this will be an excellent way to not only recognize March as National Nutrition Month, but it also focuses some effort with our Parks and Recreation Department on the FUN project, which is Families Understanding Nature and Nutrition, and also on trying to make sure that we'll support and promote these initiatives creating a healthy lifestyle. So I'm going to give that to the Vice Mayor and give him a charge to take care of Mr. McFarland and get that done for us through the Parks and Recreation Department.
Thank you, Mayor. I will say on behalf of the Parks and Recreation Department, I think I can speak for Mr. McFarland, that the Parks and Rec employees, they're some of the hardest working employees. They have some great programs, not only for adults, but for children to keep them fit in our community. So I'll pass this along to them and tell them what you said, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks to Mr. McFarland and you for your service on our Parks and Recreation Commission. Certainly appreciate that. Council members, you have before your consent agenda. If you've had an opportunity to review it, are there any questions regarding any of the items on the consent agenda? If there are none, is there a motion we accept the consent agenda as it's presented?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. You also have the minutes of the March 15th, 2012 regular meeting. Are there any additions or deletions to those minutes as they've been presented?
Mayor, if there are none, I move we approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All right, you have a motion and second. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to rezone an area along Memorial Boulevard to Highway Commercial CH District.
I move for its passage on third and final reading.
Second.
All right, you have a motion and second. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, this time we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance amending a Murfreesboro City Code, Chapter 7, Buildings, Section 7-5, dealing with the standard excavation and grading code.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. A motion and second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
All right, this time we'll consider for passage on second reading an ordinance to rezone an area along Bradeville Pike to residential multifamily 12, RM12 district.
Move for this passage.
Second.
Thank you. A motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
No.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. This time we'll consider approving an application to renew a certificate of compliance for Ankit D. Patel and Tushar J. Otia at Victory Village Liquor and Wine, 4167 Franklin Road, Suite 5A. Ms. Wright?
Mayor, this is a requirement from the state of Tennessee every 2 years for a business that's open with a liquor license. We've received their application and the background checks, and they've met our qualifications for renewal.
All right, they meet all of our application requirements. Is there a motion to renew?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Your application is renewed. Certificate is renewed. Pursuant to a resolution adopted by City Council on March 1st, 2012, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider rezoning approximately 20.36 acres located in the GDO 1 along Robert Rose Drive from single-family residential 15, RS 15 district, approximately 10.38 acres, and general office OG district, approximately 9.98 acres, to a planned unit development, PUD district, and to remain in the GDO 1. Mr. Alan Thompson, on behalf of Lifestyle Communities, is the applicant. Notice of said public hearing was published in the March 11, 2012 issue of the local newspaper. Ms. Ely, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg and members of the City Council. The only public hearing Planning Commission has that's no recommendation before you tonight is for property that's located north of Medical Center Parkway, east of Robert Rose Drive, and south of Wilkinson Pike. It's the area shaded blue in the map that you have in your packets and the map that's on the television screen. The subject property is part of the North Church LLC property that was the same tract from which the Embassy Suites, Conference Center, and the Avenue Shopping Center were developed. The applicants, Lifestyle Communities, have contracted to purchase a 20.36 acre portion of property for the development of a multifamily complex, subject to obtaining a zoning change for that purpose. The property is currently zoned both OG and RS15. Approximately 9.9 acres is zoned OG, and approximately 10.38 acres is zoned RS15, and it has been zoned in this manner since soon after its annexation in 1998, and prior to the construction of Medical Center Parkway and the new interchange with Interstate 24. The property is also within the Gateway Design Overlay District 1, and that is not being proposed to be changed. It will remain in the GDO. In 2008, the Planning Commission reviewed and approved a master plan for the development of this overall larger property. The master plan that was approved was approved in advance of this extension of Robert Rose Drive, and it also did show that this property is anticipated to be developed as multifamily residential at some point in the future. Although the master plan is not a zoning plan, it is a something that we use as a planning tool that's required as part of the GDO regulations prior to construction of any new streets and any future development. The proposed development is consistent with that approved master plan. However, there are some changes that may require the master plan to be revised, and that is the streetscape. You have in your program, or you have in your packages, the Plan Development Program Booklet, and it's in a rather large document that I've included, and I guess you actually don't have it, you have it on your iPads, I keep forgetting that. But you have the information there, and that program booklet will actually become the zoning for the property if this is something that you approve. The planning staff believes that this application is a good candidate for the PUD zoning because the applicants have a clear idea of what they want to do and are ready to move forward with it, because it varies in some respects from what is permissible under the standard zoning classifications that are allowed in the multifamily zones. It may vary from the city's subdivision regulations. It is of a quality that could not be achieved under the standard zoning, and this will become somewhat of a landmark development. I know in the past we've taken a closer look at plan developments, and we've wanted to make sure that they do meet those criteria and to be zoned plan development. So they do. The proposed use, of course, is primarily multifamily, but they do want to have a restaurant aspect to it. So with the combination of a restaurant, which will, in their terms, be a social amenity, and the residential uses, the PUD zoning would be the most appropriate. PRD would not allow the restaurant, so their request is to zone the property plan unit district. If approved, this property would need to go back to the Planning Commission for final design review and site plan review. The proposed development is definitely different from other multifamily developments in Murfreesboro, and most likely in all of Rutherford County. You can see from the designs in your book that it has a definite urban flavor, and it's designed with many of what some people call new urbanism design principles. The applicants have hired Reagan Smith, and whose representative, Alan Thompson, would like to give you a PowerPoint presentation before you make your decision. I did want to point out that on February 1st, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing, made a decision to defer the item for 2 weeks for additional study, brought the item back up on their February 15th meeting, and after studying the item, did recommend approval of the plan, with all 6 members who were present voting in the affirmative. At this time, if you have no questions for me, I'd like to invite Mr. Alan Thompson up to give a brief presentation. If you have any questions either before or after the public hearing, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any questions for Ms. Ely? If not, Mr. Thompson?
Actually, I'm going to start this thing out just a little bit with a
Caldwell,
very brief introduction, if I may. Randy Caldwell with Reagan Smith, and of course we have Alan with us tonight, and also Chase Miller with Lifestyle Communities. And we're real excited to be before you tonight. A little bit about Lifestyle Communities. They're out of Columbus, Ohio. They're a fairly large multifamily developer, and they are making their first endeavor into the Middle Tennessee market, and they chose Murfreesboro as their first market that they wanted to come into. And a lot of that had a lot to do with the Gateway area, what they saw developed out there, what the vision was there, the product that they wanted to bring to the table that they felt very much fit within the vision and everything that was established for that area. As Margaret Ann said, we're bringing, I think, what is a very unique product to Rutherford County. I'm not even sure that I've seen this in Middle Tennessee, and Alan's going to tell you a little bit more about that as he goes through his presentation. But we have been through the Planning Commission. It's been a very positive experience for us. The project has improved as a result of that. It has evolved, and it's something I think that we'll all be proud of at the end of the day. And again, we went through a number of issues to get everybody comfortable with what we were proposing, and came out with the unanimous decision for approval on that. So with that said, I'm going to just let Alan do his brief presentation, and we'll be available to answer any questions as well as the Lifestyle Communities representatives here. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Alan Thompson with Reagan Smith and Associates here on behalf of Lifestyle Communities. Lifestyle Communities came to us at the latter part of 2011, and they brought a very unique, energized development. The first that I've seen in the years that I've been practicing, and it's got a very creative aspect to it, and it really will be the first of its kind in the market in the Middle Tennessee area, period, in my opinion. With that, I'd like to make a brief presentation on the PowerPoint. let's see if we can go to that slide. All right, good. One second. There we go. What you're looking at here is the essence of what we're trying to capture with this community. It's a whole different type lifestyle. We are looking at coming in with rental type units, but what I want to do is kind of take you briefly through the history of this project. This is the master plan that Margaret Ann mentioned was looked at back in 2008 and was approved. And you'll see the kind of orange buildings located there, similar location of where you're going to see our site located. And that was originally planned for approximately 29 units per acre for residential multifamily. This plan was assembled in order to help design the layout for Robert Rose and Willow Oak and their construction. Now we see that in place, and you can see the avenues is now in place, the convention center is now in place, and hopefully this is the next piece of that puzzle that really energized the Gateway area. You can see the Gatton property just across the street from the avenues. That's a total of 117 acres. Our site, which is the red site you see there, would be 20.36 acres of that 117. You can see Robert Rose is constructed, as well as Willow Oak to the very northern portion of the property. And then this is the site that we'd be coming in its place. And we feel like the use that we're proposing here is only going to be an asset to the Gateway area, an asset to the commercial across the street, to the convention center, and I think it's going to add a real energy to kick off development in this area. This is the site that we're looking at. There's 20.36 acres here. What you're looking at is a townhome type product, total to be exact of 403 townhomes. There's 128 single bedroom units, and there's 275 two-bedroom units. But this gives you a general idea of how we're addressing the site. Robert Rose is to the very bottom of the screen, and we've got right at 1,200 linear feet of frontage on Robert Rose. All the fronts of our buildings would face out towards Robert Rose, and the pedestrian sidewalk would run along Robert Rose. So the face of this development, the face of this community is going to be facing those public realms, and that's very important as we go through this. The other aspect that I wanted to point out is there's about 3,800 linear feet of streetscape area within our development. The streetscape area is an extremely important component to this, because a lot of the lifestyle that these people live, they live out on that streetscape. That streetscape will be lined with street trees, large pedestrian pathways to each side. The fronts of buildings face towards that streetscape. And if you go back here, you can see the courtyards where the parking area, those would be back behind the buildings. So we're really trying to create this character, this lifestyle, this know my neighbor, walk my dog, walking down the street type lifestyle in a rental type format. And here you see, this is focusing on the streetscape. You see the elevation at the top. You see the plan view at the bottom. The parking is hid to the rear. The life is out on that streetscape, and that's where you're going to have a lot of pedestrian activity, as well as on-street parking. This gives you an idea of the wall of that streetscape. The applicant has gone through a lot of detail to make sure the architecture met that character needed to help build the walls of this streetscape, because this in itself is a very important element to the amenities to this site. And this is just kind of giving you a close-up, and what you'll see is there'll be a series of 3-story townhomes with parking garages underneath them, to a 2-story townhome that doesn't have parking underneath it. And then on the corners of these buildings, you'll see 2-story flats, one flat stacked on top of another. That's done purposely so that you can round those corners and create character from an architectural appeal. This, I wanted to give you an idea of the back. This is what you'll be seeing from the motor court, and this is the back elements of the townhome. So you're even going to have character in the back portion. What you'll see is the garages along the very base of the 3-story townhomes. You'll see some character in the firewalls that go up along between the townhomes, and then even in the railing of the decks along the back there. So architectural element will not be lost as you go back into those motor court areas. This is a sketch of the front of what is the Greystone. The Greystone buildings are actually condominium flat buildings, and they're at the terminus of several of our streets. The Greystone building, the applicant that is, has gone through a lot of developing to create a special type architectural feel specifically for this unit, unlike anything that they've done in previous developments. And this gives you an idea of what the side and the back of that Greystone unit would be. So you're going to have architectural appeal even around the sides and around the back portions of that Greystone unit. Now I want to talk a little bit about the amenities themselves because along these streetscapes, which serves as an amenity, those streetscapes lead to destination points. And first I want to start with the park that you see up to your left-hand corner of the screen. This park is approximately 188 feet by 148 feet, so this is a sizable area. This is called a turbine-type park. The reason it's called a turbine park, you'll notice every street that lines that park terminates into the front of a structure. So when you're driving down that street or you're walking down that street, you have these street line trees, and it's terminated with the end of an architectural element that gives it a lot of character. And that really goes a long way in creating this outdoor room for this public park. The second amenity area is much more detailed, and this serves kind of as the social or the main social hub for this development. This gives you a general idea of what we're looking at, and it's a multi-use complex. You have a 2,400 square foot office at the very lower left-hand corner. You then have a 3,600 fitness center just to the side of that. On top of those two buildings, we'll be looking at 2 more stories of residential units going on top of those. So you're going to have a true mixed unit component. The other aspect I want to point out is how it addressed the street. Robert Rose is immediately to the south of it, and then the inner street, you'll have the front of those buildings creating that unique streetscape. This gives you an example of the 3-story type unit that you'd see out there with the residential on top, the office, and the fitness center on the bottom. And then beyond that, at the amenity center, you're going to have a very active area with professional-style volleyball courts to a very high-end, upper-end, well-used pool area. The fitness center, we also mentioned, becomes a very active portion of this development. And then this is something we wanted to pay special attention to. Another portion of this amenity area is a 4,800 square foot pub. And this is open to the public. This is a version of one that they have at another development called the Goat. But as you see the yellow circle there, that shows where that pub would be located. And this also serves as a very active social area for the entire development. And this gives you, in general, what we're trying to accomplish with this. It gives a very unique product in a rental style, and really offers a great opportunity for young professionals as they're graduating MTSU to have a real desire to stay right here in Murfreesboro's backyard. And with that, I'd be happy to open the floor to any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Mr. Thompson at this time? Looks like you answered all the questions regarding a very ambitious project. I'm surprised, but we'll open the public hearing at this time. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this rezoning, please step to the microphone and give us your name and address. Is anyone here wishing to speak for or against?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Bill Ketron. I live at 2510 Blanton's Point. I guess I am an esteemed city council. It's a pleasure and honor to be before you tonight. I guess I'm the closest neighbor to this development. I've been a resident on right off of Wilkinson Pike. Used to be Manson Pike when I moved there. In keeping with, we changed the name to Wilkinson Pike, in keeping with the historical landscaping of that area and trying to honor the battlefield, which brings a lot of visitors and revenue into our community. Been there 28 years and seen a lot of development. Used to have to travel over the railroad track to get out to where I live, but now it's right in the middle of town. I come before you tonight not to speak against this development. Mr. Gatton is a personal friend of mine. Matter of fact, a contributor to my success in staying in the state senate. He's a neighbor of my lieutenant governor from Blunteville. So I don't speak against it. I do have some concerns would like the city council to ponder. I speak to the development and those folks bringing this nice community development into our city. Thank you for looking at Murfreesboro and Rutherford County for bringing that here. But what I would ask the council and mayor to look at, you have your iPads, go in and Google as I did and look at, just Google the name of the communities or the name of the company, and you'll see all their locations. They build homes, they build condos, and they build apartments. My concern is with the use of vinyl, and I think that was some of the concerns of the Planning Commission originally. I know the reason they want to use vinyl, and I think they've said that they would use some other type of product, a hardy board type product other than vinyl. But I still feel like that if, for the long term, for another 28 years, if I'm still blessed to be there, why can't they just go all brick? I think this will be probably the first 3-story apartment complex that we have in Murfreesboro. Outside of residential, I think anything taller than that is a dorm on MTSU's campus. It may create a longer payback for this development, but they can still probably keep their rental at $650 per single one bedroom, or a little bit higher. You can see that, but you see all their developments when you click on, go to Kentucky, go to Ohio, all their different cities that you're in. Of course, brick is a little bit higher. It costs a little bit more to transport brick from the kilns out of Georgia north. And that's why when you go north, all you see is a lot of vinyl, a lot of frame. But I think in keeping with what the city originally intended to do with Medical Center Parkway is to keep that better standard. That they say it's a higher upscale. Don't know why they can't look at spending just a little bit more money, even though they say that it's what frame exposure the vinyl or the hardy board will be to the interior. It's still in keeping with a little bit higher end development. I think brick would be more becoming, especially with the battlefield and the area of historical value that we're trying to keep, and I think what has already been established by this council. in years past as the development of Medical Center Parkway from the hospital to the avenue and all the other buildings around it. Do have some questions about traffic with over 400 rental units. Where would the traffic bleed out to, as happening right now since you just put down a new layer of blacktop? The cars seem to be going a little bit faster, and a lot more seem to take the back way along Wilkinson Pike. And I'm sure that on early morning or late afternoon, because of the traffic on Medical Center Parkway, they're going to bleed out and go the back way because it's easier and quicker to go to Medical Center, go back to Wilkinson Pike. They'll go out the back way and try to disperse that way. Have some concern, and usually if your two-bedroom apartments for a young family, they're going to have 2 cars. So you multiply that, you've got 800 cars. Maybe a little bit less, but you've got a lot of traffic issues you probably need to look at, and I hope you have looked at the drainage area, because the area just to the back of where this is located, and I know they have, and currently they've tried to put in a retention pond, but that whole back area, going back to Van Cleve area, is always flooded. There is underground sinkhole, and in times of heavy water along Manson Pike, Wilkinson Pike, it always floods in 2 different sections, and we've in times past had to close Wilkinson Pike because of the heavy water and close it to traffic. And then because of the sinkhole right behind this complex, it pushes water, and actually the water table rises and water comes out and flows to the top. So I hope you've taken that into consideration as well, and not flood the other communities and households within that the Van Cleve area just behind it. So I don't speak against this development. I encourage you to look at all the other issues before you go forward, and would ask you to truly consider not going with any type of hardy board or vinyl of any means, and make sure that it is an upscale PUD, and will be there for the next 28 years as long as I'm there. I thank you for your time tonight, Mayor, members of the council.
Thank you, Senator. And again, we're honored to have you here, and thank you for your service in our state legislature. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against? Anyone at all? If not, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we'll consider for passage on first reading an ordinance rezoning an area in GDO 1 along Robert Rose Drive to a planned unit development PUD district and remain in GDO 1. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, Mayor. Maybe I guess Mr. A-Lot or somebody, have we had addressing the concerns that Senator Ketchum had, do we have a traffic study for this project, or even a
No, sir, we have not had a traffic study for this project. We do have in our plans the ultimate improvement of Wilkinson Pike. I'm not sure what the timeline of that is. I think that we may have delayed it a year or 2 on account of budgeting, but that is in the next, I would expect, 3 or 4 years. Mr. Lyons would have to address the timing that he would expect for the improvement of that road. We do expect that Medical Center Parkway does have a capacity for the road. There is a signalized intersection at Robert Rose. We would expect it would be the primarily used. But I do think the Senator is correct. There will be a use of the back way in and the back way out. If I were to live there, I certainly would, because it would be a very convenient element that would make that part of a nice place to live.
What about he'd mentioned the sinkhole and the study of the flood. What do you think the effect of the rooftops and the asphalt would have on the adjoining neighborhoods? Because we are all very aware of the flooding issues in the past out there that they've encountered.
Well, that is something we have studied, and that is something that I can give you a little bit of information on with a little bit more certainty. The flooding out there is caused by sinkholes. There is very little doubt about that. We've seen it. We've been able to measure it. We've actually had the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, under contract with us to help study those sinkholes. We began to do that before we saw development begin to really take place like we have now. Back when Mr. Ken Hayes was our city engineer, we worked on that. There's a couple of things that contribute to the drainage problem, though, and one of them is the roadway itself, Wilkinson Pike. It's one of the limiting factors, and most of the houses are built so that they're elevated above, but occasionally, and one of the worst hard hit, or one of the most hard hit areas, is due east of this property, coming off of Van Cleve Lane. The Smithsons own some property over there. Mr. and Ms. Smithson met with us a couple of times. We listened very closely to what they were trying to tell us. It is our belief that the reconstruction of the road will help to lower the elevation and will probably make their property less vulnerable to flooding. The roadbed itself and the pipe that goes under the existing Wilkinson Pike are part of the problem. They were built before anybody really understood the way the drainage functioned. It is mostly agricultural land out there. In fact, that road was built before the Civil War, just to give you an idea of the original roadbed. And it has been just improved through the years. The metal pipe that goes under it has been damaged. It doesn't drain as efficiently as it should. It's probably undersized. And there is a second element. And the second element is that between the road and between the pooling area behind the Smithsons, there is a rise in the land. So the first thing that happens is when the sinkholes rise, it gets backed up by that rise, by the little rise in the land, a saddle, if you will. Once that's overwhelmed, the next obstruction is the road. We believe that some improvements to that saddle could help to delay the amount of flooding. And this is the kind of thing that happens periodically. It doesn't happen with every event, and sometimes it may be several years before it happens again. Then again, it may happen 2 or 3 times in 1 year. It just depends upon the groundwater conditions. Second thing that we have done is to have the developers, with the construction of the road, create some large detention areas. And they are already constructed. They are already sized for these additional rooftops and impervious areas that we expect. So, Mr. Bratcher, I think that we've got a pretty good handle on the new development that's going to take place here with the detention areas that have already been constructed, and we believe that the ultimate improvement for the existing drainage problems will be with the reconstruction of the street.
Is all of Wilkinson Pike in the city now, or is part of it still in the county?
Pretty much all of Wilkinson Pike is in the city. In fact, we annexed it just so that we would have the ability to control it, to name it, and to reconstruct it when the time came.
And the use of vinyl on the interior walls, I think that's a change from what we have allowed in the GDO area before.
Well, quite frankly, we've not really been faced with anybody wanting to use vinyl to date. This is really the first time that anybody's come through with a vinyl project that included vinyl at all. We've always steered them to masonry and to cementitious siding. We do have several projects that are siding, or do have a combination of masonry and siding. That was something that the Planning Commission struggled with quite a bit. Well, I'll even step back. I think that I struggled with it quite a bit. My first comments to the applicants was that that will be something that's going to be very difficult for the council and the Planning Commission to accept readily. That vinyl is something that we view in this community as maybe of a lesser quality than brick, and maybe a lesser quality than a cementitious siding, and that when we have a preference, our preference is to go with masonry. They studied upon that. They came back with the a vinyl for some of the motor courts and for the backs of buildings. The backs of the buildings are remote from any other property owners, at least 300 to 600 feet away from them. They're also not along the main streets. They're not even along the main streets within the development. They're in limited areas. Ultimately, I could only push them as far as I could push them. It became the responsibility of the Planning Commission to review it. The Planning Commission studied it. They actually looked at some samples, and I think they developed a comfort level with what they were seeing. I think there was some reluctance. I think at initially there was a lot of pushback on that subject, and they even deferred action on it to look at it further. They asked that there be if you will, a policy that's more of a guidance. It's not intended to be ordinance. In fact, the Planning Commission made statements that they desired that it not be ordinance, but a policy to help the next guy that comes in to understand what would be acceptable. And basically, it would require the single plank vinyl, the vinyl to be 6-inch planks, have a wood grain, that it be the thicker vinyl type instead of the thinner wall. It would be .44, I guess, millimeters or inches. Yeah, inches. And that it be at least so many feet away. I think the distance was at least 300 feet away from an adjoining property. And there were some other details as well. I think that may have been included in your materials as to what the Planning Commission was thinking. So ultimately, after studying the mayor, they did recommend approval with the expectation that vinyl would be used in those areas as shown in the program book.
Can I ask you for just one clarification? And I know you talked about the flooding. Are you telling me that there's not going to be any issues with flooding because of this project? Or are there detention areas on site at this particular project that they're doing? Or you gave me a good long answer, but I don't know if I understood it.
There are detention areas on the larger tract of which this is a portion, and that these properties will drain into. And one thing I didn't say, and because I felt I was getting a little bit long-winded, but I will tell you that in this large drainage basin that does flood, they enlarged it to account for the additional drainage that they'll be putting into it, so that there will be no net impact by this development or even additional development on that development tract to the west of Robert Rose.
Mr. Gailey?
Joseph, you touched on some of the criteria that when the Planning Commission worked out for use of vinyl product and in future gateway. In addition to what you've listed, we also talked about limited uses of it, not just the type of vinyl and the wood grain and distances, but actually even particular uses within the project itself. You shared that with us. And then also, before we go, do they have the samples of the product here? I think that would be helpful, because I think that was very helpful at the Planning Commission. Don't you agree, Doug, to actually see it?
Absolutely. I'm surprised they hadn't drug them out yet.
Well, when you pick up to the sample board, you'll find out it's rather heavy.
But while they're bringing that, if you would address the use limitations.
I think this may have been included in the agenda materials, but number one, the only time the Planning Commission would have a comfort level would be if it's coming through as a planned development. So it would have the extra degree of scrutiny that planned developments have. That would also give the council a chance to see the program with it. The vinyl would only be applied to building facades or portions of building facades that are not visible to the public right-of-way. And vinyl may not be applied to a facade that is a primary entrance into a building.
They must be selling that stuff per pound.
Mr. Thompson, if you could pull it around just a little bit more, they might be able to get the television camera on it as well. The vinyl, number 4, the vinyl may not be applied to a building facade that faces a major access drive or a major pedestrian route within a development. Vinyl may be applied to portions of buildings that are visible from adjoining properties under separate ownership, but only if there is a physical separation of at least 300 feet from the closest portion of the proposed vinyl to the adjoining property line. Now, bear in mind that the property behind this is across that large drainage area. The area to the east that would face this, that would be seen, is the large detention area that's periodically floods, where there will be no development. It will have to remain open because it's to be used as a detention area. Vinyl may only be used for soffits, eaves, gables, and other hard-to-maintain areas of a secondary nature of a building. When used as a siding material, vinyl must be at least a 6.5-inch beaded single plank with a wood texture and a minimum thickness of .044 inches. The Planning Commission may accept a demonstrably substantial equivalent. And that would be the example that's the darker of the two that would be on your left. When used as a side material, vinyl must include multiple colors to define and differentiate the base and vertical features of a building's facade. The colors of the vinyl must be complementary with the masonry materials used elsewhere on the building and must be a medium to dark tone. And vinyl may only be used as a siding material when appropriate architectural elements are used to minimize blank wall spaces and minimize visible seams. One of the things I think the Planning Commission was concerned about was seeing what we often see on single-family houses, where the seams sort of stair step down the side of a building, they want that to be hidden behind the gutter or by a break in the building, like a firewall, as we've seen on these structures. All in all, I think the Planning Commission viewed the use of the vinyl, in this case, as an acceptable way to do it. They didn't seem to have much of a problem with the building material in this instance.
We see a lot of older vinyl that when it's hail hits it, it pockmarks, it knocks a hole in it. People, for whatever reason, very quickly try to get out with the duct tape and cover it up. Is this got a more solid center to it, or does this have, again, the ability when you hit it, is it going to pockmark, obviously?
Well,
I know it's going to be protected in some ways because of the direction, but...
Mayor, quite frankly, I don't know how this will stand to the test of a violent hailstorm. You mentioned odor. I've seen brand new, newly applied vinyl that has been absolutely shattered by hail. I've seen the hardy plank that's been damaged by it as well. The hail can be a very devastating product, so I don't know how this product would stand up to that.
Okay. I have a vinyl house in Knoxville, so it also gets pockmarks in it.
Well, Mayor, on that, I've had a chance to tour the city after some of the hailstorms, and I make it a point to get out and try to see some of our neighborhoods after we have bad storms. And I have been amazed at how badly some of the vinyl I've seen has been damaged. It looked like machine gun spray.
Does this have a flex to it, or is it solid when you touch it?
It does have a flex to it. If you knock his knuckles on it, you'll almost see it. But it seems to be more substantial than some of the other vinyl I've seen that has the multiple plank per piece.
Mr. McFarland, did you have a question or comment?
I just have a couple of questions.
Please.
Reading through the packet, so will the fascia and soffit be composite material of the building? That's what I sort of gathered from the packet.
So, Chase Miller, I'm with Lifestyle Communities. Some of the trim and fascia product will be a vinyl product, and some will be a cementous product. It's the language that's used in the package is that hard to maintain areas will use a product that we don't have to paint. It won't chip. There won't be caulk that peels. What we want is a product that we can hose down and keep clean and keep looking good.
Okay. I guess, Mr. Trelott, just a couple of quick questions. Is there in that GDO area that we're talking about, is there any vinyl siding that's out there now?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. My main concern with this is, and I think if you look at the page that we had up there, I think the project itself is extremely nice, and have told the architects and engineers that, I mean, the presentation is really, the design is really good. My concern is I think this is extremely aggressive on allowing vinyl siding in the area. The part that bothers me the most, and I'm not saying that the Planning Commission decided this, because the Planning Commission does a fantastic job with vetting and making sure all the questions are answered, but it's almost like out of sight, out of mind. You know, we have it in the motor court areas and we can't see it, but it's not being seen by the public. The part that also concerns me is these motor court areas are extremely confined. You have what it looks like maybe a 30 or 40 foot opening in some of these to drive through, and we all have seen with vinyl siding areas what happens when there's not much airflow and there's a lot of moisture in a vinyl siding area, and that is mold and mildew and different things that's on the siding. So I'm not a fan of doing something this aggressive on the siding. And then I think it's page 98, we talked about the seams in the siding, and it shows the side view of one of the units where there are no gutters and no windows. It's just a blank wall of vinyl. So I guess my question would be, how would we hide the seams, or how would the seams be hidden on a wall that's big, that's that big?
Mr. McFarland, I think that when this comes back to the Planning Commission for final design review, were this plan to be approved, that we will demand an answer to that question. We do not want to be seeing the seams, and we'll ask that they provide us that architectural treatment. I think the plans that you see are well developed, but I don't think they're completely developed. And they were not completed, or really there's not been a whole lot of change to that building since the Planning Commission's meeting on February 15th.
It's a wooden frame building, isn't it? It's a stick building.
I would expect it would be, yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments as we consider on first reading this ordinance to rezone?
Mayor, some of the concerns I've heard with this project, and Senator Ketron, he referred us, I think, to a website. Because of these reasons, I would like to see us defer this to the next meeting I would personally like to take a look at some of the reference information that was given to us. There's a lot of information thrown at us tonight, and I'm a researcher, I kind of like to take a deep look at it.
I'll second that.
I would like to make that into a motion, excuse me, Mayor.
Good. Thank you. And we have a second, Mr. Washington? Thank you. I have a motion and second to defer until the next meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Any questions or comments on the motion? Motion properly made and seconded. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
No.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
No. All right. We will then defer for the next meeting, and we'll get some other information. You might make known, council members, the questions that you do have. Some have already been raised, I think. But please get with staff and let them know exactly what information you need to get so they can compile that, if that's all right with everyone. All right, at this time we'll consider recommendations of the Planning Commission to schedule a public hearing for rezoning an area along South Church Street, approximately 5.3 acres, from planned commercial development PCD district to commercial fringe CF district. Mr. Adelott.
Yes, sir. Mayor Bragg, members of the council, during its regular meeting on March 7th of 2012, the Planning Commission considered and recommended the item that you just mentioned, located on South Church Street, to be rezoned from PCD to CF. This needs to be scheduled for a public hearing.
Ms. McGannon.
Mayor, I would suggest April 26th.
All right. That's just a minute while I relearn how to use my... April 26th is, in fact, a Thursday.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we already have a hearing scheduled that day. Very good. All right, motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this time we'll hear from the city attorney with regards to changing the date of city elections. Ms. McGannon.
Mayor Bragg, members of council, at the last meeting, Councilman Gilly asked me to look at what the process would be to change the date of municipal elections from the date established in the charter to the till the August elections. Subsequently, Councilman Washington asked what the process would be to change them to November. There's a simple answer and there's a complete answer to that. In the memo that I gave you, I tried to give you both. I had some additional information that was put on your table tonight. The simple answer is that in 2010, the General Assembly passed a law saying that without regard to any charter provision, a city council could change the date of its municipal elections to either August or November simply upon passing an ordinance. So it would be the same process, no supermajority, no additional period of time to take effect. as other non-zoning ordinances, passage on 3 readings and 15 days to take effect because of the schedule that we have for ordinances and whatnot. This even could not be adopted to affect the 2012 elections, but we'll be talking about the 2014 or subsequent election cycles. In making a change to the municipal election date, state law is specific that the term of incumbents can be extended, but not longer than a 2-year period. So persons holding office who would otherwise expect to have their term end and beginning of May 2014 would have their term extended to either August or November, depending upon the date of 2014. Similarly, for those persons elected in the upcoming city election who would otherwise have a term ending at the beginning of May in 2016 would go to August or November. There's also a provision that the council can, by ordinance, change its mind, but only once if it decides it wants to go back to a date specified in its charter. So the process on its face with that statute alone is relatively straightforward and simple. The complexity that I wanted to call to your attention before you engaged in any consideration of that relates to another state law that is newly applicable to the city, and that is TCA 653-107, which deals with filling of vacancies on a city council if the city has a population of 100,000 or more, and the city is in a county with a population of 200,000 or more. That statute is now applicable to Murfreesboro. There was a companion statute that was applicable to school boards and city judges who are popularly elected, which was the basis for my opinion to you last week that there needed to be election for the 2 school board vacancies that the council had filled earlier this year and last. There is a further let me back up. That statute talks about vacancies being filled not for the remainder of the term, but until the next primary or general election, or until there's a referendum election, so that someone appointed would not fill a term, but would serve only until the next primary or general or referendum election in that city. This is further complicated by the fact that we have a city charter provision, Section 18 of the charter, which was also part of your packet, that deals with the filling of vacancies on the city council. That section, if you try to read it, may give you a headache. It certainly did me when I was trying to work how these 3 things worked together. It was amended at the council's request following issues which arose after the resignation of John Pittard from the city council. There was a desire to try and improve the private act charter, and I think all members of the council know, but for those listening public, there are different ways you can have a charter. There are 3 statutory ways that are generally applicable, and cities can have charters developed by private acts of the General Assembly. Murfreesboro is one of a number of cities who have a private act charter. So changes to the charter have to be done through legislative action of the General Assembly, generally at the request of a city. The General Assembly acts, but then the General Assembly action is only official if the city once again approves the change to the private act charter. And the council asked for a change to try and establish that it the goal was to have a duty to appoint someone to fill a vacancy only if there were 9 months before the city election, or 9 months or more before the city election, 270 days, and to have the option to do so if it was less than that 9-month period before the city election. The version that came back from the General Assembly did not match the language that the city had submitted. The council at that time decided they would go ahead and make the change, but the result is a complicating thing in terms of when the council has the ability to make vacancy appointments. The language is also complicating because that section talks about the service until May for someone appointed to fill a vacant term. And so the interplay between this newly identified statute 653-107 and Section 18 of the Charter is something that I would be coming to you anyhow and suggesting that this needs to be cleaned up. And that the way I suggest it needs to be cleaned up is for the council to decide as a matter of policy what it thinks should be the process for filling vacancies, and to decide whether it wants to ask the General Assembly to get rid of 653-107 or to modify it so that it does not apply to Murfreesboro. So after the clarification about vacancies is done between the Charter and the state law, one of the problems being, as under Section 18 now, the council's ability to appoint someone to a vacant position depends on knowing with certainty whether they are 9 months away from a municipal election. Since primaries may or may not be held, as we've recently seen with the Rutherford County Republican Party's decision about whether they were going to have a primary, it wouldn't have been known 9 months before, so that the city council, if there had been a vacancy in the council, could have known if it had the power to appoint an interim member of the city council. So the relationship between the state law saying you must have an election for vacant interim appointments at primary elections, general elections, or referenda elections, and the private act charter saying you can only appoint somebody if you're 270 days, you must appoint somebody if you're, or you may appoint somebody if you're 270 days away, needs to be sorted out. And that can't be done by the city council acting alone. That will have to take General Assembly action. There is not time, based on the progress of the session, to get that done this year. There is certainly time for the council to decide what it wants to do, see if the General Assembly will do it, and depending upon those answers, decide what, if that makes a difference in terms of its decision about the August or November election. Obviously, we haven't had, since Mr. Pitter's resignation, a need to fill a vacancy on the council. It may be that one would not arise before you were able to go to the General Assembly and get this straightened out separately from the decision about the timing of the election. But as I suggested in my letter to you, I think since no change can be made sooner than the 2014 general or city elections, there would be time to go to the General Assembly about the vacancy issues with 653-106 and Section 18 of the Charter in time to make the change about the municipal election. The other thing that I pointed out to you, I had in the course of these research for both the school board and for this opinion been in touch with Nicole Lester, our county election administrator, and had some information about cost for city elections, as well as when the other municipalities within the county have chosen to hold their municipal elections, and some facts which are in the communications to you. I know that was a lot of dense material. Let me reiterate the starting premise. The starting premise is you can change the election date with an ordinance. The corollary is if you change the date and before we get the other things straightened up, I think it would make an already complex situation worse. And so my suggestion is that the council consider what it wants to ask the General Assembly to do after they do it or don't do it next session. Then you reconsider the question about the August or November date.
Questions or comments?
Why can we not go ahead and work on the ordinance changing the date at the same time that we're asking the legislature to work on, the General Assembly work on ironing out the other issues?
Well, as I said, you can do it independently, but it won't impact an election before that you would go to the General Assembly. And if there were a vacancy during the period of time before the General Assembly acted, since the language in the charter talks in terms of May, and you would have by ordinance been talking about August or November, I think that would add a legal complexity that would make it very hard to determine when an election should be held and if somebody was validly appointed to a vacancy. And election law is very complex, and I don't think the council wants to make it worse for itself or somebody trying to interpret whether they've done the right thing. But the decisions, the statute says you can just make an ordinance decision. It is because of the population statute, the 100,000, 200,000 that nobody knew about in terms of applying to us, adds one level of complexity, and our charter provision that limits the council's ability to make an interim or vacancy appointment adds a third layer. And I think simplification is very desirable, and the orderly way to simplify it would be to ask the General Assembly whatever it is you decide you want to ask them about the population classification law and about the Private Act Charter, and then whether they say yay or nay, you'll have some factors to consider, because if they say no on some of the things that need to be changed about the charter, then I think that would be a negative factor to consider in deciding whether or not to change the date from what it currently is.
Could we not proceed with the ordinance change with having an effective date that is after next year's General Assembly, which would still make it before the next municipal election? Then were the legislature to say no on it, then we would still be in a position to revisit that, since it can be changed back once.
Yes.
Is that something you would recommend?
I outlined to you what I thought the best practice was. The other is certainly legally viable.
But whatever we do tonight, it's not going to take effect for at least a couple of years. It's whatever decision we make.
Yes, sir. The soonest it would be able to affect municipal elections would be the municipal election cycle in 2014.
Now, we've discussed August. What about November? Is there an advantage over August or November?
The process for making the change is the same. The complications are also the same. So there's no substantive difference in that regard. The information relative to what other cities in the county do is something that I'm sure could be argued both ways, that it would be advantageous because people would be expecting to see municipal issues on the ballot. It would complicate things, I expect, for the election administrator, because there would be some precincts where people would be wanting an election with one community, one city, and others not. But she's certainly not expressed that would be any practical difficulty. I'm not trying to imply that she has. But it shouldn't make a difference in terms of cost or legally how you got there, in terms of the intangibles which the council may wish to consider, in terms of the risk of confusion, in terms of a lengthy ballot and complicated campaigning, in terms of whether city candidates and their message would be heard is a council decision, not something I want to give you advice on.
Other questions or comments?
What I would like to see, just so we have in hand, is a proposed draft ordinance in writing as to how it looks, what we would be passing to change the date. We can review that and then weigh these other factors that you've shared with us.
I can certainly prepare one.
We make group decisions, so that, and I don't think there's any problem in preparing something and show it to us. So, anything else?
Thank you for getting that back to us so timely. And then also, while we're on the topic of elections, I think most of us have seen in the papers, but that Ms. Lester's mother died unexpectedly this week, and want to send our condolences out to Nicole and her family. Hiram Lester's wife passed away this week. I believe it was Tuesday.
Also, we have early voting started yesterday in the city's election, so that is open. And I hope everyone will participate, obviously.
Can I throw a kink in here, Mayor?
Well, certainly. Why would you say?
I'll be right behind you.
I was making some notes on what you brought to the council last week about us looking into changing the date.
Yes, ma'am.
So I think this would be an excellent opportunity for us to take a comprehensive look at measures to increase citizen participation as we govern our city. I think I know we all want to have greater citizen participation in our voting process, and looks like roughly we have close to, and it's embarrassing to even say this figure, close to 90% of our citizens that don't even participate in the voting process. I would like to, I know when I ran there was a lot of discussion around the issue of our present at-large system. I would like us to possibly ask Ms. McGannon if she would take a look to see if the council desires for us to possibly increase voter participation by looking at a district or a hybrid type of council system, since we are talking about voting and changing election dates.
I would be glad.
How complicated would that be?
We have in the charter a provision for going to an at-large system. That was something when it was talked about previously. There was provision. Sorry.
I knew. Okay.
Thank you. I would be glad to summarize what that has and what the process would be if any other option were to be considered, and the timelines, if that would be of interest, certainly.
What about the council? What do you think?
I think that's a great idea to get that reported back to us and see where we stand on that.
Just take a look at it.
Would it also take the general election 2 years? Would that when it would be applicable?
Yeah,
because that's our next.
I don't believe there's any provision in that section that would say if we went to district or a combination of district and at large that would impact the election cycle. There are certain things that need to happen far enough in advance of the election in terms of making sure that the districts are legally appropriate and publicizing it. So the timeline going back would be something that would be part of my memo.
Mr. Washington?
I've been pretty clear on my position on districts and at large and all that kind of good stuff, so we're not going to reiterate that anymore. But on moving the election, let me just go on and go on. I'm going to have to be convinced. If we're going, I don't have a problem with moving the elections from April to another date. But the only date I can see us moving it to is November. Because there's some groups in the city that do not participate in elections like they should. But they normally do. If you're going to get the best results on election results, November is the date. So I can be convinced differently, but as of today, if we move the election from any date other than April, the only date I'm going to support, as long as I'm on this council, is November. For that reason. There's some groups in this town, some that just don't participate for whatever reason, but they do participate in when voting comes to November. If you're going to get your best numbers or your best results and participation, November has historically been that date. And that's now, like I said, that's the only date I'm going to support, period.
Thank you. Anything else? Any other comments? Anything else on your mind before we consider recommendations of the city recorder to approve the city's annual audit contract for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2012? Is it all right to go ahead and consider that at this time?
Good with me.
Who's going to handle that?
I am.
All right, Ms. Wright. Great. Thank you.
Mayor, it is that time of year again. We're gearing up for preparing for year end, and we like to have our auditors already selected. The state's already sent me a copy of a proposal from Joe Hastings and Associates, which is the local CPA firm we've used in the past. They do have a lot of expertise in government auditing and have helped us get the GFOA certificate of excellence in reporting for the past 13 years. Their proposed fee is the same as for last year, and I would recommend that council allow me to electronically sign that contract, as that is the method the state has gone to now. And Mr. Job is here if you have any questions.
Any questions of Ms. Wright regarding this proposal?
I think it's an excellent firm.
They've done a great job for a number of years.
I make a motion that we accept that.
Second.
All right, you have a motion and a second. Any questions, comments regarding this motion? If not, please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Are there any beer permit applications?
Yes, Mayor, we have 4 tonight. They're all restaurants. We have a restaurant at 2705 Old Fort Parkway, Suite Inn. It's a new location. We have a restaurant at 2804 South Rutherford Boulevard, Suite B6. It is a ownership change and name change. We have a restaurant at 2805 Old Fort Parkway, Suite Inn, which is also an ownership change and a name change. And a new restaurant at 2615 Medical Center Parkway, number 2395. And they have all met our requirements, and they have all passed their codes inspections.
All right, they've all met requirements and passed code inspections. Is there a motion that we accept?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Motion second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gales-Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, you have a list of the statements to be considered for payment before you. Are there any questions regarding any of the bills to be paid? If not, is there a motion that we pay the bills?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Motion second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. As to board and commission appointments, council members, I apologize to you in advance. There's a fairly lengthy group that evidently this is a popular time to appoint, so I've got a lengthy group to reappoint. And starting with the Cable TV Commission, Mr. Tommy Campbell and Ms. Mary Wade, I would like to ask that they be reappointed. To the Parks and Recreation Commission, Edwin Jernigan and Tim Tips. To the Historic Zoning Commission, David Becker and Jim Thompson. To the Board of Zoning Appeals, Adam Dodd and Francis Mosby. To the Airport Commission, George Huddleston, Steve Waldron, Gail Zlotke, and Payne Hardison. To the Planning Commission, Bob Lamb and Ken Halliburton, and reappoint to Murfreesboro Housing Authority, Mr. E.E. Miller, Jr. I make those recommendations to you.
Move we accept the mayor's recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. A motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Any other business from staff or city council to come before the council at this time? Thank you, council members. If not, we're adjourned.